determines their social status. You have a cohort that reproduce now and a cohort that reproduce later. The ones that reproduce now, they have a fight for dominance. If they win, you become either a solitary individual or a primary individual in a social nest, and that's reproductive queue position 1. So if you lose, you can either leave the nest, join a new nest locally, leave the aggregation or start a new nest, or you can stay in your natal nest. And most of those end up as a secondary individual, and that's reproductive queue positions 2 onward until the last queue position, which is the reproduce laters, the tertiaries. So the Eastern carpenter bee is facultatively social, and social nests have linear dominance hierarchies, which I just explained briefly. Solitary individuals do all the foraging and egg laying in their nests. Primaries monopolize foraging and egg laying in social nests, and secondaries do some foraging, and egg laying is relatively unknown. And tertiaries delay foraging and egg laying until the 2nd year. So on the right, you can see that the total ovarian development scores of primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries. Primaries and secondaries have similar ovarian development scores, and tertiaries have significantly lower ovarian development scores, showing that they have a different strategy altogether. So Sean Proctor did a comparison of social and solitary nesting, and it revealed that there's no advantage to social nesting over solitary nesting. Therefore, I predict that solitary and social nests should have similar numbers of seasonal pollen trips, and that's our measure of maternal investment. And because of high ergonomic skew in social nests, secondaries should make fewer seasonal pollen trips than solitaries and primaries. So we studied 6 aggregations of Xylocopa virginica in wooden walking bridges in the Glenridge Quarry Naturalization Site, or the GQNS. And the aggregations are labeled here. We have A through D plus F and G. Bees were captured and marked from 2016 to 2019 using these plastic peso cup traps. Each cup has Velcro on the bottom of the cup with a hole cut in it, and that's secured to a nest entrance, so bees can drop from their nest into the cup. And then once they drop in the cup, they're stopped by cellophane secured with an elastic band. And then once we caught a bee in the cup, we cooled it on ice. After about 10 minutes or until the bees' movements were arrested, we painted them with individual paint codes, and you can see some examples here. So we observed departures and arrivals of individually marked bees to and from nests. So you see the little cartoon here, cartoon bee that's leaving the nest. She's out foraging, goes to the flower, comes back with pollen, handles her pollen, and is back out again, and that's 1 pollen trip. So we estimated the number of pollen trips per season for each marked female. The average number of pollen trips per day pollen trips per season is the average number of pollen trips per day multiplied by their activity rate. And that's because sometimes Xylocopa virginica like to take a day off, and multiplied by the total suitable foraging days. And that's because we rotated throughout the park, so we weren't at each aggregation every single day. So what we found is that social primaries typically forage more than solitary bees, and secondaries do very little foraging at all. So we have pollen trips per season on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, we have the different classes, solitary, primary, and secondary. And you can see that there is a significant effect of class. And but in 2018, solitary females actually outforaged primaries, and that was quite interesting. So you have pollen trips per season on the y-axis again, and this is the same data, but just showing the effect of year and a class year of interaction. So most of the years, you have solitary, which is lower than primary, and then secondary is very low. But in 2018, you have solitaries out foraging primaries. And then in 2017, there was not a lot of foraging, and so there was a year effect as well. So our prediction that solitary and social nests should have similar numbers of pollen trips was not correct. Social primaries made more seasonal pollen trips than solitary females in most years. And social secondaries foraged far less than solitaries and primaries, and that agreed with our prediction, our second prediction. But what about the secondaries that made a lot of pollen trips? So maybe you were looking at the graph and wondering, hey, there's a lot of secondaries that are outliers making a lot of pollen trips. What are they up to? Well, I wondered that too. So we asked the question, does the provisioning queue order influence the number of pollen trips? And in fact, it does. The order of provisioning significantly influenced the number of seasonal pollen trips. So we have pollen trips per season on the y-axis again, and provisioning orders 1 through 6 on the x-axis. And you can see that there's a negative relationship with decreasing provisioning order. And then there was a year effect again, that was 2017, was significantly lower. So what does it all mean? Well, primaries probably have the ability to feed their nestmates, and that might explain why they forage more. And primaries usually lay more eggs than solitaries, which would be quite interesting and shows an advantage of social nesting. Secondaries and tertiaries would benefit from nestmate feeding. And high-ranking secondaries probably contribute to egg laying, and they certainly contribute to foraging. So the next step I have is to determine how much pollen trips second-year bees make. So those tertiaries that delayed reproduction or low-ranking secondaries that delayed reproduction, I want to know how much foraging they do and how does that compare to the other classes. So I'd like to thank everybody in the Brock Bee Lab, past and present members, and then my field assistants, Andrea, Lillian, Medea, Radia, Tyler, and Travis. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lyndon. So we see some questions in the Q&A chat. So this question is from Jess. Do you think that in social nests, secondaries force the primary to forage more, maybe to wear her out faster so that they can have a turn?
Ooh, interesting theory. I haven't really thought about this chapter a whole lot because it's on the back burner right now, but that could very well be happening. I have to think about it a lot more, actually.
And Jesse has a question. What do you mean by order of provisioning?
So the order in which they provision the nest. So I have an extra slide. So in these graphs, you can see the flights that individuals are doing. So on the top right, there's one individual in blue that starts foraging, and then the next individual starts afterwards, and then the other one just stops. And then in the bottom middle, you have one individual that starts foraging, and then the purple individual starts, and then there's like 3 other individuals that do a little bit, and one does a lot. So that's what I mean by order. So that the order in which the activities happen for each bee.
Awesome. I have a question, actually. You happened to mention that there were some days where the bees just kind of take a day off. Is that like coincided with like weather patterns or anything, or just sometimes they need a self-care day and they say, screw it, I'm staying home?
Yeah, sometimes they need a self-care day and they say screw it. Yeah, I'm not too sure why. We just know that it happens. But it's something I'll think about a little bit more for sure. Thank you.
Does anyone else have